Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Hydrogen Full Court Press interview. I'm Ignacio Perez, Associate Gulf Intelligence, and I'm sitting virtually here today with Charlie Ratam, Hydrogen and Offshore Wind Corporate Advisor and Trainer. Charlie, it's a pleasure to be here with you again.
And you, thank you very much, Ignacio.
Amazing. So to kick off this interview, I'd like to start asking, well, we just finished here in the Middle East, the COP27, it just wrapped up a few weeks ago, and we're starting to gear up for next year, COP28, the second back-to-back climate summit that's going to take place in the Middle East and North Africa 2 years in a row. I'd like to start by asking, where is the hydrogen space standing at this moment after all the events at COP27, and what do you think it will be its role? What role will it take in the over the next year with COP28 ahead?
Yeah, great question. It's still nascent. There's still perhaps more talk, but there are signs of activity now. Money is being spent. Front-end engineering and design contracts are being let. In some places, diggers are going in. Thinking of in the Middle East, for example, a project in NEOM, which is much wider than just hydrogen or ammonia, but has a significant element of both within it. Is in construction now. And here in Europe, there's certainly signs of activity. I'm just back from Rotterdam. The Maasvlakte, the quayside upgrades are in train now. We've had a couple of strange years, haven't we? We've got a major European war raging as we speak, which wasn't predicted by many in Glasgow, COP26, which is where I was last year, and on the back of 2 years of COVID pandemic as well. So it's been a really strange run-up for hydrogen and indeed major projects more generally. But there are signs now of money being spent, of moving away from talk into deliverables, which is always good. It's a difficult one to call. There are all kinds of tectonics out there, the energy element of the war as well. But there are encouraging signs as well that the nascent hydrogen economy is now starting to form and take shape.
There seems that because of the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it seems we're at this point at this trying to balance this trilemma between energy security, energy affordability, and the energy transition. Where is at the moment hydrogen standing in this regard? Do you think this is a temporary remedy they're looking for, or is it going to continue? Our governments continue pushing with investments into the hydrogen space over the next years, regardless of the evolution of the conflict?
Yeah, that's another excellent question. I think one of the big advantages is that it's more of a permanent remedy rather than temporary. It is expensive, of course, and that has raised eyebrows. And people from a non-fossil and certainly from a nuclear perspective raise questions about the efficiencies of hydrogen as well, some of which is indeed valid. But I'd be disappointed if it was a short-term remedy. Here in the UK, for example, natural gas is running out, and that's real. So something has to be done. And hydrogen offers an opportunity to at least reutilize some of the assets which we, the people, have paid for. So it's a long-term option here in the UK, not the only option, but a significant one. If we are going to deindustrialize or decarbonize industry, then hydrogen offers us a route to net zero. There's not too many for that. So rather than thinking short term, I think one of the problems is that it's long term, but we need quick fixes perhaps because of the war and it's expensive. So we are reversing some transition fuels back into the mix. The security aspect you've mentioned has given a bit of a stay of execution, if you like, for certain tech. But in some ways, you could argue that the war has hastened the search for long-term sustainable solutions, and I would certainly put hydrogen in that category.
Yeah, it seems like the conflict has definitely made everyone push the accelerator for renewables, at least as a for the long term, as you said. In the short term, that's why probably we've seen an uptake of fossil fuels, and for instance, Germany going back to burn coal to produce electricity. Do you think this acceleration can be maintained in time?
Yeah, I mean, here in the UK, for offshore wind, which is one of the big drivers of of the renewables sector, we've had a big success. We've got up to 11 gigawatts installed, which is just won a sector deal. The government's acknowledged the success and is supporting it with regular leasing rounds and bringing together key stakeholders to de-risk. So certainly in the UK, the track record is good. Germany's slightly behind us, but moving very quickly. For offshore wind and indeed floating offshore wind, that's almost at a quantum leap in the last 12 months. New entrants, Australia, Taiwan is ramping up, India's come in, South Africa, even some of the African countries, Mauritania, Namibia, Brazil. So the leap is quantum. It's a quantum leap. I think one of the challenges was how do we deliver that apparent success, because there's not that many of us know how to do it. So we need to train people by doing to meet the targets the governments themselves have set. So it's a very promising trajectory. But there's a big difference, as we know, between talk and delivery, certainly for major projects. So it's promising, but a lot of work to do yet.
And speaking about the skills and training, where are we standing now at the moment? What are how do you see from a corporate standpoint? You're more involved with training corporates, right? So where do you see we're standing?
It's again a great question, because we're going to need more and more skilled people. There's some good starting bases. The oil and gas sector in particular, good safety culture. It's got the skills required, a lot of the logistics, the knowledge of how to deliver major projects, and renewables brings some of that as well. So there'll be some baseline with existing skills, but there will be new opportunities. Some of the new roles, certainly involving some of the Internet of Things, some of the new technologies and supply chain will be new. So that is a challenge. Our government's looking at it. Our all-party parliamentary group is addressing the skills gap, if you like, and trying to fill it and make sure that the colleges and universities are aware of the change, which is going to happen anyway. And then we're ready to fill it. So it's a challenge. I'm doing my bit for training as well, but there's much more to come, and perhaps a bit of joined up thinking. It's time to start thinking about that as we go from the nascent to the actual next couple of years.
Yeah, it seems like in the sustainability space, everyone's trying to figure out what are the main skills, or where they can play their part in playing their part in the energy transition, in being more sustainable. We've also seen over the last few years the emergence of new positions, new roles, especially at the C level, right? For example, the figure of the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer, that is starting to emerge, as well as other areas besides sustainability, like in data science or cybersecurity, starting to have chief cybersecurity officers, chief data officers. So can you see that something similar can happen in the hydrogen space?
Yes, it's already happening. You've mentioned the technology, the innovation.
Not only let me clarify, not only at the C level, but also say at other levels, like middle management, whatever.
Certainly from a major project point of view, certainly my mailbox is anything to go by. The oil and gas and utilities are all recruiting offshore wind, hydrogen project managers, senior project managers, and directors, which is good. There's not that many people know how to do it, so there's a limited pool, but there's chance for people to train up. People come from similar backgrounds to take the charge. So let's think how they would do that. Well, oil and gas is very well placed, because they're now starting to fuse with floating wind and offshore wind. There's been some background mergers and acquisitions, bringing in some of the skill sets, but many more need to be trained up. By doing, we're not going to sit back and wait. We'll do it. We'll start the projects and then train by doing. And that includes stakeholders as well, includes planning officers, includes the government, a whole heap of people. But it's an opportunity to learn through doing rather than waiting for some perfect situation. That's not how it works. So there's a lot of roles to be filled. But if you've got a background in major projects, if you've got a background in refining, oil, gas, renewables, then you're in a good place. And especially if you're up to date with the technologies, the Internet of Things, things such as the technologies we're using today, where we're working and collaborating across the globe, and that is routine. And I suppose the pandemic did accelerate some of the remote ways of working, the innovation and the technologies that will be incorporated into the new hydrogen and indeed offshore wind economies, which are coming.
So you could say the say this digital skills gap that many companies are facing at a more general level. It's pretty much intertwined with the skills gap you can find in sustainability.
Yeah,
Digital
I think
sustainability.
anybody coming out of university will be expected to be savvy with the whole suite of technologies, and where they don't know it, to be able to learn very quickly how to use them. Every company uses different technologies, but there are similarities as well, whether it be Zoom or Teams or SAP or whatever major projects involve. I think the new breed of worker will be flexible, well briefed, and responsible also. I suppose from an IT background, if you stay still, you're going backwards. The speed of innovation is so quick. So I would urge anybody wanting to get involved, just keep the skills up to date and through doing largely. And what you don't know, ask your teammates and learn. Don't expect to wait for that perfect course 3 years down the line. The world is moving too quickly for that. So self-solve where possible. And I think sure that will happen for the bright people out there.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting topic for any student, recent graduate that might be listening to us. I like to ask about, well, last year, I believe we asked you about the economic sentiment of investors towards
Yeah.
hydrogen.
Yeah.
And it definitely plays a big part in mobilizing funds towards hydrogen projects. How do you think, how do you feel you see that this has evolved over the last year? Do you see
Yeah.
investors more willing to put
Yeah.
money into
Yeah.
hydrogen projects?
Yeah, slightly surprisingly, coming from a renewables background, the money is there. I've hosted a couple of, moderated a couple of sessions, some in the city of London, some in Sandton, the city of South Africa and indeed Africa. And the message that's coming through loud and clear is, please don't think the finance isn't there. It is there, but keep your projects robust. Make sure you follow the KPIs, all the milestones, all the things that are well governed project involved. And again, that ties into the skills section, that a lot of them don't necessarily need hydrogen skills. They do need skills such as knowing how to keep a project moving, well governed, documents in place, safe, all of that documented. It's all part of the bigger picture, of which hydrogen is a very important part. So the message that's coming through loud and clear is that the money is there. Not to say you don't have the hoops for financial close. It's tough. But if you've got a well-governed project, and perhaps you could also self-probe, putting in key meetings yourself to make sure that you're doing the bank's work as you go through the project. You don't lose track. You keep it tight. You keep a track. Things do change in major projects, of course. But if you keep a track of it and justify it, then you'll be in a much better place when it comes to that all-important financial close. And that's the message from the banks. Keep it tight. Keep it robust. But certainly here in the UK, they said, look, people laughed when they said you're going to build oil and gas assets in the North Sea. Can't be done. And yet we've got a major successful oil and gas sector here in the UK, and the appetite is to do the same with hydrogen. I get the same message from the Middle East. I get the same message from Southampton and Johannesburg and elsewhere. It's a slightly strange and counterintuitive message that the money is there, keep it tight, and you will be in a good place when it comes to financial close.
And is there any way you think that to mitigate the potential risk that might be creating these second thoughts for investors before putting the money into hydrogen?
Yeah, any board would invite you to look at alternatives. And there are alternatives to hydrogen. It doesn't have to be hydrogen. In fact, even within the hydrogen sphere, there are derivatives and then the blue-green arguments and all this kind of thing. So you need to justify it, justify that it aligns with your company values, the philosophy, the mission statements, the United Nations 17 sustainability goals that you mentioned via the corporate social responsibility a little bit earlier on. If you align with them and have regular checkpoints through your project, check that you still do align, check that the company philosophy hasn't changed, check that your merger hasn't knocked you in a different direction. So then you can keep your project on track. A lot of it is quite hard, but it's far better to do that within the project team through the development process than have a nasty shock with a delayed financial close with all the expectancies that go around that. So a lot of it can be done through good best practice project governance, keeping it tight, as I say, and making sure that it does meet what you said it was going to do and continues to do, that nothing changes through project life. These are long projects, and of course things change. 10 years for Seagreen, so big that the technology was obsolete. So the better project came out as a result, but a 10-year delay wasn't very pleasant for those of us involved with it.
Definitely. Hopefully we can see more more financing coming in with with the level of maturity growing in the projects. I'd like to ask you about the broader value chain of hydrogen. Of course, you're also involved in helping companies enter the markets. Um, is there any? Can we see at the moment a commercial case for hydrogen at different at different points on the value chain?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's supported at the moment in the UK. It's expensive. It's going to cost. Having said that, we have to do something. Methane is running out, so we have to do something. One argument is that you've got the infrastructure, you've got the kit, you've got the pipes, you've got the repeaters, and it might come in at a quarter of a cost if you're repurposing assets rather than going from new. So that's a plus side, but it's going to cost. So your value chain and your supply chain, they've got to take a bit of a risk and say, well, look, it might be a risk at the start. Having said that, we do have 14, 13 million people connected to the existing grid, gas grid in the UK. And so you might say, well, something's going to happen, and it might be a good punt or a good risk to take that something along hydrogen will happen, some of it. We don't know the speed of it. We do now have the clusters, so they'd be a good place to start. Other places to start include refineries and ports. So if you were to say, well, we'll focus it, we'll take a limited risk. We're not going to risk everything in our company in it, but we will get involved. That is up to companies. Certainly it's happening. Oil and gas companies, utilities, and the supply chain itself, the manufacturers, the boiler makers, the pipe makers, the makers of specialist equipment, the internet, the specialist technology companies, the cyber security people, all can start in getting involved through joining the clusters and see where the contracts, the first clusters are now contracts are starting to be let for free. If you get involved in the front end engineering and design, then you can start to think, well, we can take a real good view as to where this is going to go, and that's for the companies to decide. But I think it's a pretty good bet. So the supply chain should be looking, even if they don't want to get involved, as what's happening, because it's a very vibrant sector.
And what are the most common challenges in the journey of companies when entering these markets?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is actually talking to the right people at the right time. People from big oil and gas and big utilities are not used to dealing with SMEs. They're a bit scared of them. SMEs can be a bit of a risk for them. They like companies like themselves that don't go bust. They've got a strong balance sheet. They can ride out a storm. So that's a risk for the big companies. Baked into the sector deal, they have to talk to them. It's by law. So if they don't, they're not even going to get a stamp to say they've had an application accepted. That's not the same as a consent. So that's the part of the Green Deal. So if SMEs or companies know that, they know there's an opportunity. Companies are increasingly setting up outreach sessions, portals, means of engaging. Some of those are quite torturous and they're never the same. So they're quite hard. Having said that, you know that they will be looking for health and safety records, quality control, ISO standards, certain things. If you want to get involved in a serious sector, there's certain things you can do as a company to prepare. So it doesn't take much to put a pack together involving all the things you do with your health and safety culture, your record, if there has been an incident, how you addressed it, how you're going about your ISO, your international accreditation. If you haven't got it, how you intend to get it. You don't have to have it all from day one. I think companies would expect that you to align with their corporate goals. So a lot of them now putting net zero in procurement. How do you align? Are you going to have electric vehicles? Are you going to have hydrogen fuel cells? Are you going to have welfare facilities that are net zero? That's the kind of thing that the big oil and gas are now starting to expect of their suppliers. If you know that, you can prepare. Of course, it might cost a few pounds more, but you might get the contract, and your rival who's cheaper might not. That's the reality of some of the procurement policies. On top of that, your net zero cities are driving the agenda as well, and they'll have something similar with an even more ambitious timeline. So should you wish as a company to involve yourself in the hydrogen sector, then prepare. Prepare for that kind of questioning. You will be expected to have it. If you don't, your rival might take the price.
Right. And talking about oil and gas companies and other hard to abate industries, recently the message and the focus has been put on decarbonization and lowering emissions from their operations. In the case of oil and gas, getting to the lowest possible emissions per barrel of oil or a tank of gas. What what role is hydrogen, the different
Yeah,
colors of hydrogen playing in
yeah,
that space at the moment?
yeah. Excellent question. It's a slightly counterintuitive concept, isn't it? Carbon is decarbonizing, but that you can do it, especially on the operations, which is the bulk of a project life. There is some very interesting um, kind of options here in the UK. The INTOG, Innovation for Technology and Oil, group set up in Shetland and elsewhere, where there's a round focusing on floating offshore wind. And I suppose you can tow the turbines into where the site is, not where the wind is. So it's where the site is, an oil and gas platform perhaps, and put a wind farm next to it, and rather than use diesel, use wind. Then of course, when the site is expended, when the reservoir is dry, I suppose then you could say, well, we're going to do something else. A wind farm can be left or stay. Then you might look at blue or green hydrogen and say, well, we're going to use the platform for something else. We're going to use the underground reservoir. We're going to use it for carbon capture. We're going to use it for hydrogen storage. Who knows? So it's actually quite an interesting transitional perspective. So there are some interesting schemes around the world. I think blue is well placed. That's the steam and methane reforming in certain places as well for oil and gas, thinking places like Oman and the Middle East, and green, where floating wind particularly, where you can take the kit to where it's needed rather than where the wind is also something of a game changer. So watch the innovation technology for oil and gas round, which is happening here in the UK, in Scotland as we speak.
Right. And talking about engagement of stakeholders, you said that was one of the main challenges of companies looking at the hydrogen. Where do you think there's still room for, say, for improvement for in terms of the quality of this engagement? Which type of stakeholders should engage or should engage more often among each other
Yeah,
for in order to advance hydrogen and decarbonization efforts?
A lot of it's now at sea, and a lot of it is across borders, and that involves international governments. You might also want to then involve the military at an early stage. They're not always keen to share some of their concerns, so I would certainly get them involved. Then along with the international bodies and also fisheries, of course, if you're moving offshore there, some of the fish that migrate are difficult to predict where the key environmental concerns and commercial concerns are. So certainly engage them. Here in the UK, we're doing a pretty good job of it. The de-risking major projects at government level. So by the time the zones are made available, the key risks have at least been addressed. I'm not saying they're all solved, but you know when there's a leasing round that I'm not saying that all stakeholders are thrilled, but they're at least comfortable that they've been consulted and it's less bad for they and their members when these leasing rounds are happening. So that's quite smart. So that's the government or the Crown Estate here in the UK taking the lead. Others are doing something similar. Boehm in the United States, a big leasing round off California as we speak, oil and gas interests as well. So it could be a mix of fisheries, military, intercontinental interests, long distance telecoms, and any other stakeholder. It's a bit of an art putting the relevant stakeholder group together, but I'm sure that stakeholders are quite capable of saying, hey, we demand to get involved. It affects our members, it affects our industry as well. So that's an improving part of the situation.
Yeah, and drawing a parallelism with with climate finance, we've seen that, for example, during the last COP, also during COP26, there was many voices asking for the private sector to mobilize greater funds, private sector in the sense of commercial investment banks, large investment funds, whereas we're seeing like most of the climate finance are coming from governments and multilateral institutions like the World Bank. Is it happening something similar in the hydrogen space, that we see like this type of stakeholders that they're asking them, hey, you should be doing more, or you should...
Yeah, I mean, people always want more, but I've been surprised, as I've said, by the City of London coming to me and saying, hey, we're here, we get it, we get the bigger picture, we want it, we support it, with the caveats that they want it to be robust. South Africa, likewise, green hydrogen is considered bankable. Obviously, they want to de-risk it, so they were keen, if they're the governments, and especially if some of the sovereign wealth funds and pension funds also start to see a bond type of yield with a slightly different risk profile. Obviously, hydrogen's been around for 200 years, so yes, parts of it are new and parts of it are risky, but not all. And I think there's a feeling that if you have a proper risk matrix, a risk-reward matrix, and do things robustly, then it's very much an investable proposition. Different messages from around the world, but as I say, I've been pleasantly surprised, ranging from Southampton to the City of London and elsewhere, how much of an appetite there is for large-scale finance to back the hydrogen economy.
Right. And for my last question, where do you think hydrogen will be in the next 5 years? And also, which region you think will become a leader in this space?
Yeah, great questions. Well, first, certainly hydrogen projects will be delivering within that timescale. The ramp up will be perhaps 3 or 4 times the size. It's still niche at the moment, so it sounds more impressive than it actually is. But where? One curious thing from nowhere, it wasn't in the IEA report 3 or 4 years ago, but coming back from Africa, I've been surprised at how aggressive and how quick some of the stakeholders want action in places such as Namibia, Mauritania, Morocco, Egypt, South Africa, all of which have projects in the pipeline and an appetite to deliver. So that's one surprise, that Africa could be a front runner in the global picture. Brazil is making some very interesting noises, and of course Europe as well. The Chinese market shouldn't be forgotten. They tend to do most, but it's a little bit hard for some of the European companies to access now. There's the political dimensions making that a little bit difficult as well. But in a global picture, of course, China as well. So all of those places will have projects, major projects in the ground within that timeline for sure.
Right. Well, it seems that we hit the 30 minutes mark. Certainly, it's a topic that we can be talking about many different aspects of it, but we're just limited by the 30 minutes mark here. Charlie, thank you so much for your insights today. I really enjoyed the conversation today, and follow Gulf Intelligence and Charlie and Ratan on social media for more insights on hydrogen. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.